Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. I know Bob said he would be playing at a festival today and won't be joining us. And Carol is visiting family in Atlanta this weekend. But it's good to see you here today. And we'll talk for a few minutes about the Lotus Sutra, continuing discussion of the Lotus Sutra. And it may seem a little odd to spend time today on this 2,000-year-old text. I mean, it's just looking around, you know, it looks like it's a beautiful day here anyway in St. Louis. Sky is clear. The temperature is temperate but cool, and the squirrels are busily enjoying their bounty of acorns, and it's just a beautiful day. And yet, you know, if we turn on the news, it seems like the world is just crumbling around us. So why do we spend our time thinking about studying, trying to gain understanding of this 2,000-year-old text, the Lotus Sutra? Well, the Master Dogen said in the Genjo Koan, to study the self, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. And to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to become intimate with 10,000 phenomena. So in a way, they're all three part of the same practice: studying the self, forgetting the self, and becoming intimate with everything out there. And just focusing on one or the other of those three is incomplete. The Lotus Sutra tries to make that bridge between studying the self and becoming intimate with 10,000 phenomena. It's part of our practice. So we'll talk about it a bit. This last time we talked about a chapter called The Parable. And this time the next chapter is called Faith and Understanding. Now, we've been relying on this excellent translation by Jean Reeves of the Kumarajiva text, written in Chinese, which was translated from Sanskrit. We also have access now to the Sanskrit text, but around the world, most of the texts that are studied and relied upon are based on the Kumarajiva translation from Chinese. And interestingly, the title, Faith and Understanding, is not really an accurate translation of the Sanskrit word that is used for the title of this chapter. A more accurate translation, Jean Reeves says, of the Sanskrit would be attitude or disposition, a chapter about attitude or disposition. But Kumarajiva substituted the title Faith and Understanding. I just make a note of that because it's something to keep in mind as we go through this. This is another sort of father-child parable. And there is sort of a risk in making these father-child analogies because people have different feelings about that relationship, father-child. Some people, perhaps for good reason, despise their father, and other people absolutely adore their father. And then quite a few people have more moderated feelings that are perhaps a mixture. So that's one thing to just be aware of and perhaps set aside, because we're talking about here kind of an idealized father-child relationship when we make the analogy. And another pitfall with father-child analogies in our culture is the strong influence of the Judeo-Christian tradition, where the father is associated with a divine being who can intercede in human affairs, who is omnipotent and can very directly help you out in certain ways. And that is not the intention with this analogy here. We can see in these stories that the father figure is certainly not omnipotent and can't just change things around at will, but has to use skillful means. So the last chapter, in part, was about arrogance. As you might recall, when the Buddha started talking about this great vehicle, this one vehicle, this wisdom beyond wisdom, at a certain point, 5,000 of his followers got up and left the room. And he attributed this to, the Buddha attributed this to arrogance, that they thought they already knew all they needed to know, and there wasn't really any more to learn. There wasn't any more to understand. There wasn't any more wisdom to gain. They had achieved nirvana and were done. Which the Buddha called arrogance. And this chapter is more about, well, arrogance obviously being an impediment to greater understanding, to realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. And this chapter is more about unworthiness or fear as an impediment. So the story. Well, first of all, who is speaking here? In the first parable, the Buddha was the narrator of the parable. In this chapter, 4 of the Buddha's followers are the narrators of the parable, sort of in unison. And as I've done before, I'll read sections to give you a flavor of the writing style and also to help advance the story here. So the chapter starts off, Faith and Understanding. At that time, 4 men living a life of wisdom, these were Shravakas, or disciples of the Buddha. Subhuti, Mata Katyayana, Maha Kashyapa, and Maha Madgala Yayana. Hearing the Buddha, they had never heard before from the Buddha the assurance by the world-honored one of Shariputra's future supreme awakening. They were astonished and ecstatic with joy from experiencing such an unprecedented thing. That Shariputra would indeed in the future be a Buddha. They immediately rose from their seats, arranged their robes, bared their right shoulder, and knelt on their right knee on the ground. Putting their palms together in complete devotion, they bowed in respect, gazed up at his honored face, and said to the Buddha, "We, leading monks, old and worn out, believed that we had already attained nirvana and could go no further. So we did not seek supreme awakening. The world-honored one has been preaching the Dharma for a long time, and all the while we have been sitting in our places, weary in body and mindful only of emptiness, formlessness, and non-action. Neither the enjoyments nor the divine powers of the Bodhisattva Dharma, purifying the Buddha lands and saving living beings, appealed to us. Why was this? The world-honored one had made it possible for us to rise above the threefold world and gain evidence of nirvana. Besides, we were so old and worn out that when we heard of supreme awakening, with which the Buddha teaches and transforms bodhisattvas, no thought of pursuing it was attractive to us. Now, hearing directly from the Buddha that Shravakas, disciples, are assured of attaining supreme awakening, we are very happy. We have gained something we never before experienced. Unexpectedly and suddenly, we have now heard this rare Dharma. We see ourselves as extremely fortunate. Without even seeking it, we have acquired something great and good and extremely rare. So, so then they go into this parable to try to explain their former and present situation and this transition, this transformation that has occurred for them. And the parable involves a father and a son, as I mentioned. There is a sort of a father of modest means living with his son. They don't mention the mother, by the way, and mothers often have more profound effect on children than fathers, but nonetheless, this is about a father and a child. So the son, probably around the time of adolescence, when children become more rebellious, left home. He left home and started wandering far and wide, looking for work here and there, just trying to keep himself fed and clothed. And having few skills, he did menial labor here and there, wearing down his body, and just really barely surviving, growing kind of thin and gaunt, with tattered clothes, wandering here and there. Well, meanwhile, his father was becoming tremendously wealthy. He was a merchant of some sort, and was involved in buying and selling and did very, very well. And he did so well that he moved to another town and got into a more elaborate house, a more, you know, a more expensive house, and had an estate with servants and many animals, many goats and sheep, etc., and precious metals, gold, silver, lapis lazuli. And this went on with the son out there wandering around and the father getting wealthy for, as it is said, 50 years. So, I mean, the son's now in his, what, he's got to be in his 60s at least. And the father, of course, is getting quite old. And the father getting old has remorse about what happened to his son. And he is concerned because he doesn't have anyone to leave his great wealth to. So, as it happens, his son, gaunt and thin and in tattered clothes, happens to wander into the village where his father now lives. And he comes up to the gate thinking, well, maybe I can get some work here and get at least a meal and something to survive on. But he sees his father there at the entrance, and they're having some kind of feast or something, and his father is sitting in a lion chair and surrounded by servants and all friends and relatives and various people, living lavishly. The father immaculately dressed in fine silks, embroidered cloths, and the son, seeing this, thinks, "Oh boy, this is I don't feel comfortable here. This is not the place for me. I need to go to a poorer community where I'll be better accepted. Here, they might just take me as a slave or kill me." So he goes running off. But meanwhile, the father has seen him, and despite the fact that it's been 50 years, recognizes him and sends a couple servants out to retrieve him. So the servants do run him down, and but at this point, the son is terrified. He thinks, "Oh, for sure, they're going to kill me. They're trying to capture me and kill me." So the servants bring him back kicking and screaming, and the father knows that it's not satisfactory, and he says, "Well, just let him go." But the father doesn't give up on the plan. He decides that, well, maybe if I sort of um, groom him a little bit with this, if I send out a couple servants who are dressed in tattered clothes and are dirty, maybe he'll feel more comfortable coming to work here. And he does so, and these two servants again track the son down and offer him double wages for coming to work at where they live. And the son thinks, okay, this I'm comfortable with this. So he goes and back to the estate and is given the task of shoveling manure. And he does this for 20 years. He's getting quite old now. So after the son has been there a while, the father approaches him, and he does so by dressing up in old clothes himself and making himself a little dirty and going out into the barn and working with him. And he says to him, young man, now you should stay and work here and not go anywhere else again. I will increase your wages, and you won't have to worry about needing bowls, utensils, rice, flour, salt, vinegar, and so on. There is even an old and worn out servant you can use if you need him. Take it easy. I'm like a father to you. You don't need to worry anymore. Of course, the son doesn't know that this is actually his father. I'm like a father to you. You don't need to worry anymore. Why? Because I am old and advanced in years, but you are young and vigorous. All the time you have been working here, you have never been deceitful, lazy, angry, or grumbling. I have never seen you display the faults of other workers. From now on, you will be like my own son. Then the rich man gave him a new name, as he would to a child. Then the poor son, though pleased with all of this, still thought of himself as a humble laborer. Thus, for 20 years, he continued to be employed at removing dung. After that, they gained confidence in each other, and the son felt he could come and go easily. Yet he continued to live in the same place as before. World-honored one, they're telling this story to the Buddha. Then the old man became ill. Knowing that he would die soon, he said to the poor son, I now have abundant gold, silver, and rare treasures, filling my storehouses to overflowing. I want you to have a detailed understanding of the quantities involved and what should be received and paid out. This is what I have in mind and want you to do. Why? Because from now on, you and I will be no different. Be careful to see that there are no careless losses. The poor son, accepted these instructions and took stock of all the goods, gold, silver, and other valuables, and of the various storehouses, but never expected to receive even a meal for himself. He continued to live in the place where he had lived before, and he was unable to get rid of his sense of inferiority. Well, well then, as time passed, the old man, getting older and sicker, called a meeting of townspeople, all of his relatives, friends, dignitaries in the town, and his son was there. And he made an announcement. He said, gentlemen, I should tell you that this is my son, my natural born son. In another city, he left me and ran away. For over 50 years, enduring loneliness and suffering. His original name was so-and-so, and my name is so-and-so. At that time, when I was still living in my hometown, I worried about him and looked all over for him. It was here that I suddenly happened to meet him again. This is really my son, and I am his father. Now all my wealth belongs entirely to him. When the poor son heard these words of his father, having gained something he never had before, he was filled with joy, and he thought, without any intention or effort on my part, these treasures have now come to me by themselves. So then there's an explanation, explanation of the story, which I think gets a little complex. The father is, of course, a symbol or personifies the Buddha. But what is the Buddha here? What is the Buddha? Clearly, it's not the man who lived 2,500 years ago and died and is interred So what is the Buddha? The Buddha in these stories seems to have become transcendental in a way, signifying perhaps the reality of human existence, signifying the Dharma, signifying the way things are, signifying some fully mature adult, some model for us. The sun, of course, is the Buddha's disciples, those who listen to these teachings, who try to gain understanding from them. The sun is essentially us. Those who are seeking greater understanding. And all of this talk about material wealth is clearly not about material wealth, but about spiritual wealth or wisdom, if you will. Wisdom beyond wisdom. There's this theme throughout the Lotus Sutra of partial wisdom based on words, concepts, lists, rules, stories, and wisdom beyond wisdom, which is realized through living our lives, playing our part, and can't be directly transmitted by words, concepts, rules, lists, and parables. That these things can point a direction, but they cannot encapsulate wisdom, which is unencapsulatable, immeasurable. So the four disciples, in talking about this, say, the Buddha too is like this, knowing that we are pleased with small things. You did not tell us before you can become Buddhas. Instead, you told us about being free of fault, fulfilling a lesser vehicle, and being Shravaka disciples, listening to the rules, just doing as you're told. And being satisfied with just having relief of pain, but not joy. We took the extinction of what was within to be good enough. Having done this, nothing more remained to be done. Even if we heard about purifying Buddha lands or teaching and transforming living beings, we did not aspire to do them. Why? Because all things are empty and tranquil, without coming to be, without extinction, without being large, without being small, without fault, without action. Thinking in this way, with no felt joy throughout the long night, we neither sought nor attached to the wisdom of the Buddha. So there was a sense of unworthiness, which they go into, just as the rich man, knowing his son's sense of inferiority, used the power of skillful means to soften and win him over. Only later did he entrust him with all his wealth. So too with the Buddha, displaying rare actions and knowing that some want little things, He uses the power of skillful means to soften and temper them, and then teaches them greater wisdom. Today we have obtained something we never had before, what we had not even hoped for has come to us by itself, just as that poor son obtained innumerable treasures. So this parable sort of addresses the long road to unraveling a sense of unworthiness, which is viewed as an impediment to greater wisdom. But I wonder, I'll leave you with these questions. Would the poor son have been better off if he would have just stayed at home and been a part of his father's wealth building with a kind of sense of entitlement, a sense of entitlement to his inheritance? Would he have been better off that way than living the life he led and then coming to realize these great gifts and feeling immense gratitude? That's one question. And the father in these stories represents the Buddha, but what does the Buddha represent for us? And the third question is sort of raised by the fact that the son wasn't really striving for wealth. He was simply playing his part, living out his life. With patience and with diligence. Would it have been different if he were striving more? So I think I'll stop there and we'll break up into rooms. I think yeah, which will take me just a moment, and we'll come back together in a few moments for more discussion.